slides. Well, thanks, Brendan. Thank you for having me here this morning. I do speak around the world. My favorite last place I visited was Tahiti, where I got invited. I had a 1 hour notice to fly to Tahiti and then inspire a bunch of youth to build a new nation for French Polynesia. So I'd rather be in Tahiti right now, but I did take the bus in this morning from our home in Bill Creek, Old Strathcona. So it turns out that when I wrote my book, The Economics of Happiness, and was published in 2006, my mother-in-law, who's my editor, said, "You got to get this book out. There's a tsunami of happiness building." And little did I know that she was right. And now it seems like everybody's talking about happiness. I just came back from China. I was teaching at the Harbin Institute of Technology, where it's much colder than in Edmonton, believe me, to 20-year-old students. And the course is called Economics of Happiness. The U of A doesn't have a course like that, but HIT in Harbin is the MIT of China. And I realized that those young students were coveting the same material things that we grew up coveting, or at least I grew up coveting. In my generation, I was taught to work hard because I have a German immigrant father. And I began my very crooked journey thinking when I went to university in 1978 that I would first be an optometrist, and then I went into economics, and then I started articling with Coopers and Lybrand and hated that, and then I went to forestry and really got lost in the forest. But discovered the wisdom of the economic system, the wisdom of our own philosophies, our ancient philosophies, particularly Western philosophy and Chinese philosophy. So let's start with this question, what is happiness? Anyone know what it means in Greek? Well, it turns out happiness, Aristotle said, is oidaimonia, means well-being of spirit, spiritual well-being. I was invited by the Bhutanese Prime Minister to the UN in April to a conversation with the Secretary General, the President of Costa Rica, to develop a new economic paradigm based on well-being and happiness, or happiness and well-being in that order. But not once did I hear a senior Buddhist advisor to the King of Thailand say that happiness means well-being of spirit. So I just want to be clear that when we say happiness, most of us will say, all I want to do in my life is to be happy. But happiness then, properly defined, as Aristotle said, is a sense of well-being that comes from a great sense of knowing that you're on the right path. You know, the word vocation actually means to find your inner voice. And all of us are trying to find that inner voice. In fact, when you were about 10 or 11 years old, I don't know if you remember, I remember, it's like suddenly I woke up. I was an adult. Like, so what am I going to do in this world? And it turns out that your happiness quotient starts to decline when you go into puberty. And then you go into junior high and you start getting examined, right? People test you and you feel like a monkey. You got to pass all these, get all these scores. And yet, so at the very moment when you're the happiest you could be, in fact, when you're 10 or 11 is when their happiness is highest, then it starts to go into the trough. And by the time you're 44, you've hit rock bottom. But that's because you've probably finished paying off your mortgage, which is a French word meaning death pledge. Sorry, bankers. My grandfather-in-law was the president of Bank of Montreal. I don't think he knew that definition. And then you start crawling your way out of that trough, and by the time you're 75, you sort of, like Thelma and Louise, you might drive off the cliff into the sunset of another level of happiness. But it's bizarre that at the very moment when you were awake and started to ponder, what am I doing here? What's my purpose in life? Is when we start to actually degrade that possibility. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out how this world, how it functions, what's our relationship with money. So coming here this morning, I thought, I'm a storyteller. All of these slides, they're wonderful. They're pictures of what I do and where I work. Some of you may have heard of a company called Interphase. Ray Anderson was the founder of Interphase. And when I wrote my book, I thought that, we need more business people like Ray. One day Ray said, I went to bed one night and I had to give this speech on the environment. And I'm a capitalist. I produce carpets and toxic things that go into landfills. And I had to come to this realization that I was the captain of the end of birth. I was creating things that would end up in landfills that who knew how long they would need to degrade. And why wouldn't I produce carpets that created a truly renewable and life-giving economy? And Ray single-handedly turned Interphase around. He died last year of cancer, like half of us will. But he gave us hope that there are new possibilities like Startup Edmonton, where entrepreneurs can find their inner voice and find the financial capital that comes from my generation who have invested in stocks that are in Toronto or New York in which I have no relationship with. And yet I get my monthly statements. I have no idea what they mean. And it's bizarre that we've given away our power to some folks in Toronto and New York, and yet the money should be working here to support young entrepreneurs. I'm going to deal with three questions. What is the economy for? Why does the economy have to keep growing? What is happiness anyways? And what's this thing called money? It's funny that next month I should be talking about money. But I'm going to be the bridge between happiness and money. Because I've studied money a lot, believe me. And money is a fascinating thing. And it can consume you or enrage you. And you're going to learn things today that are going to hopefully blow your minds. So economy actually comes from the Greek, means household management. This is our house in Mill Creek. I was profiled in Avenue magazine, I guess, a couple of years ago. Why is this man so happy? My neighbors were enraged that I got profiled and not them. But we have one of the happiest 90th Avenue neighborhoods. We have cooperative cocktail parties. We hang out with our neighbors every Friday night. This is what real community is about. It turns out that the happiest communities have a strong sense of belonging. They know their neighbors by first name. But most of us move every 6 years. How could we possibly get to know the place in which we were born? When I worked with the Inuit a few years, they said, you know, you Southerners are insane. You keep moving yourselves, dislocating yourselves. How could you possibly have a relationship with the land? And First Nations have taught me that Edmonton is a very spiritual place. You know that Edmonton, in the middle of Edmonton are the words Monto, M-O-N-T-O. Do you know what it means in Cree? It means spirit. And we don't even know that story about what was going on here 150 years ago. Well, I think every household needs a CHO, a Chief Happiness Officer. And that's Jen in our household. And our girl, Stephanie Renee, who looked like that a few years ago, now look like that. It's kind of scary. My Chinese students were like, your daughters speak Mandarin? Like, not yet. Anyways, I said, you got to get a Land Rover first, and then you can invite them to Harbin. So, like all of us, inside of us is this burning desire to contribute something meaningful to the world. What is our calling, our vocation, that inner voice that wants to sing a new song? We all are part of a choir. We don't all have to sing the same tune. In fact, if anyone studies things like chakras and that, there's something really fascinating about the A string. Do you know that the A string today is tuned to 440 hertz? Anyone in music? Want to play music? Who plays music? There's no musicians here? Closet musicians? So what do you tune your guitar to, your piano to, or your violin to? 440 hertz. Well, it turns out the Nazis brought in the 440 hertz standard. It used to be 427 hertz. Do you know the 427 hertz is the same frequency as the pineal eye? Your chakra. Sorry, 432 hertz. 8 hertz makes a big difference between what we hear in orchestras or pianos or guitars and what we feel here. That's why the Chinese torture drop treatment is so effective, because it drove you insane. Anyways, I digress. I digress a lot because there's lots of stories. But I had a dream, and the dream started when I woke up when I was sitting at my Dilbert cubicle in Alberta Treasury in 1996. And I would work for Jim Dinning, Treasurer, and I was doing the government business plans and measuring performance. And I said, why are we so fixated on this thing called gross domestic product? How is it that it's the only measure of progress? And all the prime ministers, they all talk about we have to stimulate the economy and keep growing. Well, what if I have enough stuff? What if I'm satisfied with my life and I don't need more money? Then what? Well, it seems to me then I'm a villain, because I'm not driving this prosperous Alberta economy. I'm not making more money as if that's the most important thing. So I had a dream, and it came sort of like slowly, starting to ask the questions like a child. Why? Why does the economy grow? Need to keep growing. Where does money come from? And I wasn't getting any answers. Not from my professors who's supposed to teach, not from my high school teachers. Nobody taught me about where money comes from. Not my dad. He just said, do you think money grows on trees? Well, I learned later, yes, it's true, because I'm a forester. Of course it grows on trees. And what gives freely without expectation in nature? The sun. So why is it that we create money out of our imagination, our creativity? We create it artificially scarce. We spend our whole lives fighting about it, divorcing about it. And yet it's something we created. And yet we have no idea that we have an ability to change our relationship with money. And so that became my passion. Bobby Kennedy once said, the gross national product, he said this in 1968, a remarkable speech at the University of Kansas before he was killed. He says that this measure of progress called the gross national product measures napalm and the destruction of the redwoods, yet it cannot comprehend or measure the joy of our children's play or the integrity of our politicians. How can this measure that's dominated our consciousness since World War II be the only thing we count? Surely we need to be measuring what matters. So that was my motivation in pursuing this question. Now, it turns out that we are at a terrifying point in history where this is the U.S. Situation right now, where since 1950 you've seen a steady economic growth, the GDP. But and this little graph here is something I worked on called a genuine progress indicator. It actually adjusts the GDP for things like social costs and environmental costs, and you get a much different picture. It's not very popular with prime ministers and presidents because we like, maybe it's guys, because we like upward sloping curves, right? But you know what? Life isn't like that. Life is like the snake eating its tail. It's a life cycle. Forests demonstrate the model. And yet, we will go along this path, and guess what happens? Well, like in a natural forest, there will be a catastrophic fire eventually. So what happens when that day comes? And it's coming, like Thelma and Louise. So this graph is a really important one. This is the amount of debt that's outstanding in the United States. And I could spend the next Startup Edmonton talk just talking about that graph. But that's a terrifying graph, because what it says is the economy actually has to keep growing just to service the interest payments on the debt. We talk about compound interest, right? Well, this is the result of compound interest, where the debt never gets repaid. It's not like your mortgage or your student loan. The amount of debt here consumes about 36 cents on every dollar Americans spend. 36 cents of your day, of your dollar that you're earning, is going to pay for interest, which is unnecessary. It's killing innovation. It's killing nature. And it's all unnecessary. And so I would love to just reboot the matrix, forget even Neo. Like Neo wasn't even courageous enough. But there's some oracles around there that will remind you how this matrix can actually be rebooted. And we could do it in a moment. President Obama could in a moment declare that they buy all the debt back from the banks, throw the bankers in the Hudson River. Don't drown them, just cool them off, scare them enough. Or most of them are sociopaths anyways. and reclaim the sovereignty over money. We are in the midst of I've got my colleague Robert McGarvey here. We formed a little company in May called Genuine Wealth. And Robert got really excited when we met at a dinner party. Everything's by chance. You meet someone like, wow, we get along. He's writing this book on capitalism. I'm like, oh no, another apologist for capitalism. No, Robert says, we're in the midst of an asset revolution. What does that mean? We're in the midst of a revolution both in accounting and an understanding where wealth is being redefined, where progress is being redefined, where money is being redefined. And it's being redefined by the original definition of wealth, which came from the 13th century Old English, And I always say Adam Smith couldn't accept the fact that the English got it right because he was Scottish. But the English old definition says the conditions of well-being. So here we start with happiness, which means well-being of spirit, and we have the word wealth means the conditions of well-being. Oh my goodness. It changes everything, doesn't it? Oh, I'm getting text from my whatever. Distractions. Now, in this model of what I call genuine wealth, so you have two words now, wealth being redefined, and then genuine means to live authentically. It means to live according to what's in our hearts. What do we value most? The word value in Latin means to be worthy or strong. It doesn't just mean monetary. And so we have maybe the tree as an expression of what this new economy might look like, where virtues are the roots. Virtue means it's a sense of excellence, right? What is excellent for a good life? Aristotle said, not Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas said, building on Aristotle, that what is required for a good life are two things: sufficiency of material needs and virtuous action. So ponder that tonight. Are we living according to virtue? And what virtues anyways? In China, the virtue now is like materialism. But they have ancient Chinese virtues, which the Chinese economic national policy is called Chao Kung. Chao Kung means, in Confucian, well-being. It's unbelievable. You ever heard Prime Minister Harper talk about well-being? He's talking about mining and, get Canada's mining sector globally recognized. Like, what about well-being? We're the happiest country in the world, or the third. That has to be driven by values. What do we value? What do we love about Edmonton? What do you love about your neighborhood? What do you love about your life? And there's at least 5 forms of capital, of which financial capital is the least important. We have human capital and social capital, our sense of relationship. Our human capital, our dreams, our skills, our capacities, and then natural capital, which is probably the most important. So our daughter Stephanie. So to live genuinely means to live authentically. Sorry about that. So if we combine these words, we have genuine wealth. Actually, this is Cortez Island in BC, where I had the privilege of teaching the first MBA program in sustainable business out of Seattle. And we would take our students out under the accounting. The first hour of accounting class was go out and sit under a tree and ponder the whole basis of accounting. Accounting was founded by Luca Pacioli and his student Leonardo da Vinci 500 years ago. Based on what? The golden mean, the notion that everything in nature is driven by the Fibonacci sequence, the divine ratio. Debits equals credits. I didn't learn that in accounting, believe me. And Deloitte didn't teach me that. So, if genuine happiness, as Aristotle says, is a sense of well-being resulting from achieving excellence in the fulfillment of one's functions. Kind of clinical, but every one of us can explore that. Every one of us will explore that our whole lives. But for me, happiness comes from, as my friend Orest Andre said, are you leading your life or just following it around? When young people say, can I spend an hour with you? This young woman's coming up on Monday from Cochrane. I need to meet with you. I need to talk to you about my entrepreneurial ideas. Come on up. I got 2 hours to talk. Let's go to the Sugar Bowl and talk. And I say, are you in touch with your joy? Do you know what joy feels like at the cellular level? Because if you're not waking up every morning and feeling a sense of joy at the cellular level, then maybe you're not doing what you were called to do, what you were here to contribute. So there's actually a science of happiness. I've worked with the Madoff victims, clinical psychologists in New York. They're all like traumatized by Bernie Madoff. It's like, oh, forget Bernie. Like, get back to your Jewish roots. That, all these Jewish families who were victimized by Bernie Madoff. What were they violated by? By trust. They trusted Bernie. Get back to trust. Jewish people are great at sharing. They know how to hang together when things get tough. And the true science of well-being is about the relationships that we have with each other. And ironically, money is the greatest thing that corrupts that. If there's anything that's a risk, it's trust. And yet, when we learn to give and receive, you have to have it both, right? Some of us will be Bill Gates. Other of us will be street people like my friend Leonard, who lived 25 years on Edmonton streets. And we need both, giving and receiving. You need reciprocity to make the real economy work. So here's our happiness curve, right? And now, you can get really clinical. You could say, well, what are the determinants of a good life? Well, these might be the personal assets that you need to develop to have a good flower. I do these flower diagrams in Excel. And you could take data and create your own little flowers and say, how am I doing on my social networks and my friendships? We can ask people these questions in surveys. We can have conversation circles, etc. We can embed this into the business plan of the city. Okay, the last issue is our relationship with money. And we could talk for hours about this. But it turns out that the number of very happy people in the United States has actually been going down since the end of World War II, and yet incomes have continued to rise. Now, there was just an article in Atlantic Monthly last night. One of my colleagues just sent me and said, no, yes, money does buy happiness. It's all about absolute and relative money. You know, we'll quibble about this forever, but the truth is most of us come to that realization that when we've had enough stuff, when we've paid off the mortgage, when you're debt-free like my wife and I have achieved, suddenly you're like free. You're like, wait a minute, I don't have to work as hard as I did when I was in my 20s. I can write a business plan that's now in alignment with what we want to do, which is walk the girls to school every morning, or which the girls have had the privilege of enjoying. Their friends don't. Their friends' parents are getting up at 6:30 and getting on a bus, or, and paying the mortgage, getting all stressed out. I say I want everyone to enjoy that privilege. I want every Canadian to realize that most of us would only actually have to work 3 or 4 productive hours a day. And we could figure out an economy that shares in that distribution of well-being. Turns out there is this is a graph showing GDP per person and happiness. And you can see Little Bhutan, which has brought us the gross national happiness policy, is optimizing levels of happiness far lower in terms of GDP than Alberta or Luxembourg. And the natural question would be, as Albertans, why could we not say that we could optimize GDP somewhere here where the curve starts to taper off? What if we had that conversation? Wow, that would be exciting. Now, this real secret of happiness is to appreciate that, in a sense, you already are complete. What nature teaches us is abundance. But there's a certain lie in our lexicon. A friend of mine said, you know what the word fear stands for? It's an acronym. It means false evidence appearing real. Now, if the truth is abundance, and nature teaches us that it's abundant, even the climate change issue, to me, is just a wake-up call to saying, stop focusing so much on money. We've got the debt cliff coming, for sure. It's terrifying. It could create absolute pandemonium and chaos. But just stop for a moment. Just blink for a moment. Start a Twitter feed to Athens and tell the Greek people, start reading Plato and Aristotle again. Keep drinking your lousy Retsina wine. Eat souvlaki, dance more, break more plates. Break more plates. It's good for the ceramic industry. Take back the power. Take back all the euros out of your ATMs. And my friends say, are you serious, Mark? I said, the students at U of A. What if 20,000 students declare, we're not paying our student loans? Why don't they pay us to go to school? Didn't we talk about a knowledge economy? Oh, no, we'll get the World Bank, to issue a student loan, and then you have to have a mortgage, and your average housing prices are $450,000. It's insane. So there's some, I know I'm a bit of a radical, but I'm also free. I'm kind of free from the matrix. I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm my own boss. You run your own enterprise, and you run your own household. So I'm going to conclude by saying our little group called Genuine Wealth is a small startup. a cooperative corporation. I believe the future belongs to things that are going on here in Startup Edmonton, where great ideas are shared. There's a sense of belonging, a sense of reciprocity that's going on here. You could think about becoming each other's bankers. You think about creating banks that actually operate without charging interest, like a bank in Sweden that I've studied. You think about creating new, exciting ways with Kickstarter and crowdfunding, right? Think about creating a new Edmonton Community Fund where my TFSA money is staying here, and building an amazing fund that will support all of your dreams and ideas, and make sure that our daughters get to work and find their joy here. Those are all the opportunities just waiting for us to pick up, and they're all possible. It's my last evening in Tahiti when the sun was setting. I was on the beach, and I was like, gosh, you know, James Cook came here 267 years ago. Do you know why James Cook sailed to Tahiti? He came to observe the transit of Venus across the sun. I was there like 3 weeks after the next time. And Cook came and said, I can't believe this place. I'm going to call it the Island of Love, because people don't work here. They're in the beach in the afternoon. Their fruit falls from the trees, and they walk in the water and catch a fish. Now the Tahitian youth are bored. They want to go to Paris. They think it's better in New York. I'm like, are you guys kidding? Nothing's changed in 150 years. And so it's time to reclaim our joy and our dignity, our sovereignty over money, and begin to design what I'm calling an economy of well-being and enterprises of well-being, where well-being now becomes a central organizing principle of all society, where we no longer will be focused on returns on investment, but well-being returns on investments, and where assets become the fundamental building block, true assets of our society. That day is possible. All of us are responsible, and that's it. Open up to conversation. Hopefully this is a good catalyst for inspiration.